if you're in enablement, you know that one of the biggest challenges that you face is driving adoption of the technology that's available to our teams. We know that the value doesn't come in the purchasing of the technology, but actually in the delivery and the adoption of that tech into the workflows of our people. But far more focus goes into the evaluation and the sale of the new piece of technology compared to the actual process and strategy for driving how this tool is going to be adopted, where it's going to be weaved into the workflows, how it's going to be beneficial and leveraged in the organization. Well, in this guide, we're going to show you how a sales enablement platform like Seismic can be leveraged to drive home the adoption of your technology across the stack, to try to help with tech sprawl, and most importantly, that they're available, obvious, and logical for the flow of work for your employees so that it's weaved into how things get done, driving the outcomes of why we bought the tools. And think about adoption, we need to zoom out and most importantly, focus on the learner. Who is the end audience that's going to be consuming this content? So by way of a visual and example, we like to think of things through what we call the learner's adoption journey. And basically what we're calling out here is there's a progression that every knowledge worker is going to go through when it comes to a new process, a new piece of software, a new initiative, as to how they're going to go from unaware to effectively aware, fully competent in using this process or new tool. And through each one of these stages, a learner is going to have different pieces of information and different access that we need to meet them where they are to make the most of that learning experience. And so thinking and following pedagogical learning, we really want to make sure that we have these different learning modalities and the different types of content, meeting them at that point of need. So starting from the first stage here, working our way from left to right, we have the first exposure with the tool. And this is where we're really going to be focusing on the concept of what is in it for them, or what we call WIFM. And this is where we're going to be trying to personalize this experience as much as possible for that end audience so that they have the relevant information for them. And that this information is brought to them in some sort of next stage here we'll call onboarding, basically the first way in which they're going to be driven through a learning path to experience this content. This is all about orientation, context setting, making sure there's logical paths that deliver and drip this information to them so that they can build muscle memory, but understand the process or that piece of technology. And as they begin to scale, they're going to be ramping up their know-how, and they're going to want to practice and have a safe environment that they know and kind of feel that they're doing this thing right, that they have a way in which they can test and feel like they're getting skill developments in that process so that they can become competent in that particular process or piece of technology. And as they get into this competency journey, this is where they're feeling confident in their ability. They want to make sure there's some level of instruction and backup to support and guide them as they're experiencing and doing their work. And then lastly, as they've sort of exited and are fully competent in the particular process or set of technologies, they're always going to need a reference or a refresher. Processes change, technology changes, and sometimes they just don't go through the flows on a daily basis and they forget. We need to have ways that we're reminding and refreshing them about this information, ideally just in time at the moment of need. And so you'll see in this progression through this adoption journey, we need to cater how we're going to deliver this content to them based on where each of those people are. So the first step is to do what we call the WIFM exercise and the what's in it for me. Really what we're trying to do is take each of the end audiences that we plan to roll this out to from a learner perspective and break them into some sort of cohort or grouping. Usually this is by job title, but it can really be broken down any way you see fit. For this example, I'm just going to use this project being we're rolling out a new opportunity flow in a Salesforce example, and we're launching this as a new product to our team internally. And the audiences are going to be account executives and the sales development team. So now that I know who the audience is and I know what the project is, we can go through the process of basically doing a WIFM exercise to make sure we have a good objective for what's in it for this particular audience. And ideally, you'd rinse and repeat this for each of your audiences or cohorts. And what this is really doing is it's making this experience personal. Change is difficult for organizations. Change is something that we have to manage, and we have to make sure they understand why we're changing and make sure it's impactful for them so that we can get the right behavior change aligned with the outcome we're trying to produce. So the design of this exercise is really to make sure we're extracting all of those insights so that we can provide some documentation. And with everything that we're going to weave into this learning, we're designing for that end learner and we know what's in it for them. And that's how we're going to get this to stick and resonate with this end audience. So you're going to see in the guide here, there's a PDF that accompanies this. You can use that as reference. And this guide will kind of walk you through some of the best practices in terms of the role identification, how to structure and prioritize these things, how to break them into categories, how to basically make sense of what a good guide looks like for each one of these audiences. And you can use that at your discretion for what makes sense for your particular project. So once you're going through this WIFM guide, you know who you're designing for and what the project is, we really need to be thinking about what we call the WIFM statement. And this is basically saying that this particular role is going to get this outcome or KPI out of this particular project. So the formula we use, just for rough speaking here, is by using this insert tool or workflow effectively, I can achieve X result, which helps me do Y deliverable or KPI and makes my job easier by this particular pain point. And this process will really help you kind of crystallize why we're doing those things and attach this to that audience in a real meaningful way. So another little cheat sheet that we have for you, we've actually created a public custom GPT specifically for this process that should be very helpful for you. You can see the link here below. So this is a custom GPT that we built based off of this WIFM worksheet that we have here. And what it allows you to do is basically, it'll ask you a series of questions to make sure that you're aligning and building a good WIFM guide for your particular audiences. And when you launch this, it's basically going to ask you a series of questions to help you arrive at building this guide for you. Make sure you get the right sets of information. So you can see here, it says, hey, I'm the WIFM GPT. I'm going to ask you a series of questions in order for me to build this guide for you, right? So it's going to ask you things like, what's the scope of work of the project? And for time purposes, I went in and filled in this information. So I said, for rudimentary example, we're launching a new initiative with our sales force. And it's going to ask you, why is this being prioritized now? It's also going to ask, what's the anticipated business value or expected outcome of this particular process? And this is where you want to be as detailed as possible, explaining why management and leadership is prioritizing this project and what you're hoping to achieve. It's also going to ask you about success and what measurement looks like here. This really helps us to understand why we're delivering this and how we're going to tie this in for each of these audiences. And then it's going to ask you about which processes or workflows do you think it's going to disrupt? What's the anticipated friction in the change that we're looking to manage? And again, being as detailed as possible really helps us arrive at a very useful answer for them and really helps you crystallize what the value is for that end learner group. And lastly, you'll see it comes in here with a behavior change. Just make sure it understands what needs to be overcome and anticipating what kind of friction you're going to experience on the back end as you begin to roll this out. It's going to just ask you if you want to make this WIFM guide for any other personas. So in this example, I just did account executives. You could certainly do this for any of your persona groups, however you want to categorize and organize them. And what it's going to do then is it's going to spit out and create you a WIFM guide. Now you can adjust this and you can tweak the language in here, of course, and you can adjust the prompting as well. But as an example, this will help kind of cheat sheet, get you a little bit closer to that end result. And what it's going to do is it's going to break this down and help you understand if I'm speaking to account executives and I'm designing a change management plan to implement this particular process, here's the information we think that audience would care about. Quick scope of work, why it matters now, what the impact is, where they think they're going to have to change, what they think they're going to be replacing, what's in it for them, what do they get out of this, why should they care, right? And it breaks it down into this like nice, clean one pager. And this is something we highly recommend putting into your documentation. So if you're rolling things out and you have maybe a brief that's going out, or you have internal project management guides and you're going learner group by learner group, share a WIFM guide for each of those persona segments so they know what's in it for them. They know why this change is happening. They're going to feel bought into the process knowing that you configured this specifically for their needs. And you can see it only takes a couple of minutes to go through that process, but it's going to make that learner group feel like they're bought in. And now that we know the WIFM or what's in it for those different learning groups, we want to think about how we're going to onboard them to this information. Now, most organizations think about this in terms of courseware or learning paths, some sort of way to drip out this information in a very easy and digestible way to get them started and oriented to this set of information. If you're using a tool like Seismic, you can leverage the learning path or the Seismic learning functions to design courseware that can help guide a user through the flow of this information. Now, this is a rudimentary example for a Salesforce launch, and they'd have these different modules and sections. And for each of those sections, they would typically break it out into a grouping of this particular project. So usually by initiative, where we're just kind of breaking down why and what this Salesforce launch is all about. And you can see we have either videos or in this case, interactive tutorials for each one. So as they progress through the different modules in this learning path, you'll see each module breaks them into a new version or a new function of that particular piece of software. So the useful part here is really making sure we have some interactivity weaved into this if we're talking about software and technology specifically. We want users to get a feel and flow of these systems. So what you're looking at on the screen here is the iorad plugin, which is basically the interactive simulations that you can create. So if I'm actually building one of these paths inside of Seismic Learning, I would have these segments, these sections that I'm building. And you'd see through this plugin here that you could actually go and capture or create interactive tutorials. Now, in this rudimentary example, I'm just going to use one I already have off the shelf. And you can see this is an interactive tutorial about Salesforce that I built. And so all I would be doing is just embedding that on the screen for me inside this particular module. So when I roll this out to a learner in this path, they get this particular tutorial at this stage. So you'll see it's guiding them with multiple modalities. There are some text overviews here, and it's also interactive. So it's forcing them to actually it has a voiceover and some closed captioning here, guiding them to do the actions in real time, really driving home the muscle memory of that flow. So now they have a specific module that they're learning about, and they're being involved in that process, which really gets the active learning muscles going. And as they're progressing through that learning path, they have these modules in this bite-sized micro-learning that really helps reinforce these particular processes. As we begin to think about the scale of and ramping of these tutorials and the processes they're in and practicing them, this is where using a platform like Seismic is going to be really helpful. Because the same tutorial content that we could share inside of an onboarding course, we can also populate throughout their experience inside the Enablement Hub as well. So here I am in the library in Seismic. You can see we can embed and link in these tutorials and these guides on any page, in any segment or profile or workspace throughout Seismic. So if I happen to just want to have a refresher, or in this case, maybe a little tutorial, I can embed this as an asset, as a piece of content that could be surfaced at any given time and also be repurposed on, say, a page, hyperlinked in a DSR or something like that. Now, I can also do this in something like the workspace, same general idea. Again, embedded as its own unique asset or embedded into a page as well. So now if someone's going into a process, they can see these interactive tutorials and have that guidance and practice the different stages and how this is going to work and what's going to be in it for them as they're going through and learning. Even if they're standing up a program, right? Let's say you're rolling out a programmatic enablement strategy on a particular new product launch. You're launching Salesforce in this example. I may have a series of tasks that I'm trying to manage in here, aligning stakeholders and defining the KPIs of the project, which workflows we're going to do, how we're going to orient training. You can layer in all these content assets as you go, and each one of these could have an embedded piece of content, like a tutorial in them for what to do. Or you can even link in the content itself. So at this stage, I expect them to go through this particular course or reference this piece of training material. And when they do so, you could have those tutorials that they learned in onboarding reinforced in these areas. And that's really helpful for just getting them practice and know-how in these processes. You can see here, this is a page I have built. And here's an additional example where we could have it by persona. So maybe I have account executives and I want to embed these different processes at the top of this doc to say, hey, if you're going to be doing something in Salesforce, here's the launch, here's those resources. Not only is it enablement and buyer content, but it could also be instruction and training we can layer on, references that they could have, links that they could fire off from these pages, all sort of within this one experience. This is how that muscle memory and practice is going to happen when they're seeing the same content consistently throughout their onboarding experience and as they do their work in Seismic. Now, as we transition our learner into the competency bucket, this is where they're feeling very confident about what they have to do. They know the processes, but they still want that over-the-shoulder guidance. They still need to be pushed in the right direction. They still might want to reference some material as they go. And this is where we want to be building on that learning experience. So for a couple of examples, let's just say that they happen to be inside a learning path, or maybe they're on a page inside of Seismic somewhere, and they get to the experience where they go, okay, I'm no longer needing this to be in this safe simulated environment. I actually want to be live in my work. And so let's say in this example, I'm actually in my Salesforce and I'm looking for that over the shoulder training. Now, what you're looking at here is what we call our live tutorials. And this is layering in that in-app functionality. And what this is going to do when I go and hit this go live is it's giving me that guidance that I need. So now I'm getting this little card here that instructs me, gives me some multiple modalities, right? So I have a voiceover here. I've got the text instruction on the screen, but I'm now live inside of Salesforce in this example, or whatever application you're trying to drive adoption of. And now, instead of it just being them having to go through the safe environment, they're in app and they're getting a highlight on the screen, and they're actually being driven through those actions in real time. So as they do the process inside the app, our tool is walking them through and guiding them in real time through each step of that, what they need to do next, how this is going to function. They can still get the job done, but they have the over the shoulder equivalent that makes sense for them. So this is really the scale component when we talk about adoption. We're no longer having to do these live training sessions to show clicks on a screen, but we're driving home adoption by saying, hey, as if I was over your shoulder, pointing on the screen, telling you where to highlight and what to do. This is the future of kind of where things are going. This is what learners really like, because they want to just do and click and feel the activity, but they need that guidance and safety net to make sure that they're doing it correctly. And so those same tutorials are just being weaved into a different modality inside the application. And this is breaking down the barriers of traditional enablement and learning. And we're weaving that into the flow of the work where people are when they need it at the time of need. And they're getting that guidance and that reinforcement to really make sure they get this flow when they're in their work, really helping scale things like that. Now that we have competent learners who know how to do the work, they know the tools available to them, they have adopted the processes that we want them to. We also have this scalability of reference and reminders, because we know processes and systems change over time. And there are processes that people don't do a lot. And so they might need refreshers as they go throughout their work. We don't want to let that be a bottleneck to us scaling and making sure our teams are efficient. So for the refresher and reminder standpoint, these are referenceable at any time. So you can actually hyperlink these tutorials, maybe on the header of a page, or hey, here's that simple guidance, the reminder tutorial that you want to reference. You can also reference this via the browser extension that's provided through your Seismic add-on. And so if the learner is inside the flow of their work, they're already competent in the tool, they're already competent in the workflows, but they forget a button, or they can't remember how to do something, or there's a process that's shifted slightly. When we think about the maintenance and monitoring of these processes, that same browser extension can be used as a library to deliver those pieces of training materials too. So it could be, again, that quick link that fires that off, that takes them right over to the application and says, hey, here's that in-app guide that we talked about. Here's a reminder. Or it could also be the extension itself that we can layer in, dozens or hundreds of these processes. And so when they forget how to do something, they can just simply type in the library we provide via the extension of tutorials. And then once they click on that, they can launch that specific tutorial in the live mode in app. And just like we showed before, same process is there. So it follows the average knowledge worker around throughout their experiences. So if they were to jump over to a different tool, let's say it's even Seismic itself, and they forget how to do something, that browser extension is going to follow them like a in-app library, and it's going to be able to help them guide whatever they need to go and get accomplished. And so as soon as they launch that, they'll have this in this app. And if they move over to their CRM or an engagement tool or whatever it happens to be, they'll always have that just-in-time, over-the-shoulder reference that they can pull back from. And this is what really helps keep the knowledge loop really tight, because it started them from, hey, I got a safe environment, I'm just understanding this process or this new tool, I'm being able to play around with this, I'm building my muscle memory, I'm practicing, I'm now scaling this out, I'm trying and getting guidance in the app. And after I've been doing it a while and I forget or I want a reference or a refresher, I've got that available too. Right. So following me through that learner journey at any stage, making sure I have the right piece of content that's relevant to me in my learner journey